Hi there, thank you so much for joining me today. This video is going to be a ranking video where I rank all of the eyeshadow palettes that I've purchased so far in 2020. And yes, I am wearing a lot of different colors on my face, and I don't know if it looks good. I was just experimenting this morning. I had some extra time to play around with different colors, and this is what happened. And it could look horrible on camera, could look great, I have no idea. I'll find out when I go back and edit, but in person I really like it a lot. It's not my usual style, but I do like how it looks. The reason I wanted to do this video today is because I don't feel like I talk about my eyeshadow palettes that much. I don't have a lot of eyeshadow specific content on my channel, but I think about eyeshadow palettes all the time. My next video coming up on Sunday is actually going to be a wish list where I show you all the eyeshadow palettes that I really want to buy right now, but I'm not going to, but I want to. And it's like 12 or 13 palettes. I'm like daydreaming about certain color stories and eyeshadow palettes. Anytime I'm daydreaming, anytime my mind wanders, it's about eyeshadow palettes right now. There are a lot of people who do videos like this, and I'll try to have some linked in the description box. I know some people have like entire months where they only talk about eyeshadows and eyeshadow palettes. Floating in Dreams, she does a lot of really great like eyeshadow specific content. Bean also does a lot of eyeshadow palette ranking videos, 3 looks 1 palettes, eyeshadow bingo videos. She does a lot of eyeshadow content as well, so I'll have some people linked in the description box if you're as obsessed with eyeshadow palettes as I am. You've probably heard this before. I am ranking these palettes, but I do like all of them, and I want to keep all of them right now for the time being. So it's not like I have some that I absolutely hate and I think they're horrible. All of these are good, and I don't regret purchasing them because they do have some type of use in my makeup routine right now, but some of them I definitely like more than others, and that's what I wanted to discuss today. Let me start by showing you these 6 eyeshadow palettes that I'll be talking about today, and 4 of them are from Colourpop and 2 of them are from Too Faced. So I did stick to very specific brands this year for some reason. The first 2 I purchased were back in February or March, and it was part of an Andrea Mattiano bundle, and it came with the Going Coconuts palette and the It's My Pleasure palette. The next one I purchased is the Too Faced Natural Nudes palette, and this one is also, I don't think it's monochromatic, but it definitely has a gradient, and I think it's supposed to be inspired by different skin tones or their foundation shade range or something. I don't remember exactly, but clearly it's lighter and then it goes into deeper shades. And it's half matte, half shimmer. The next 2 that I purchased at the same time. These are my other 2 Colourpop palettes. The first one is the Making Mauves palette. I don't know if this is technically from the monochromatic 9 eyeshadow pan line like the other 2, but it definitely has like a very specific color story. And then the other one has a very similar color story. It's the Flutter By palette, and this one also has a lot of purpley shades and warm browns. I wanted both of these so bad, and I didn't know if they were different enough to have both. I'll get more into the difference between these 2 later on in the video. And the most recent one that I purchased is this one from Too Faced. It's the Natural Lust palette. I think this came out around the holidays in 2018. This one is 30 shades, half matte, half shimmer, and it just has, I guess, a relatively neutral color story. So I have 2 palettes here that I would say are kind of like tied for last place. I do still like them. I'm not saying they're horrible, but when I look at them compared to the other palettes, these are the 2 that I gravitate towards the least, and that is the Making Mauves palette and the It's My Pleasure palette from Colourpop. They both rank for last. I'll just talk about them separately. The Colourpop It's My Pleasure palette is really nice. I did try to hit pan on one of the shades in my Pan Those Eyeshadows project, and I did really like it. I love that even though this is a monochromatic palette, they have a wide variety of different shades and finishes, and there's a lot of different purples to work with. You can create a lot of different purple looks with this. I don't have anything negative to say about the formula or the diversity of the colors or the packaging or anything. It really just is that I'm not reaching for these types of shades right now, and I'm not gravitating towards this palette over the other palettes in my collection. I do like purple eyeshadows, but I think because of some of the shades I was working on in my Pan Those Eyeshadows project, or just in general, I wore a lot of purple eyeshadow in the past year or so, and I think maybe I'm just a tiny bit burnt out on it. I will come back to purples. It's not like I'm done with purples forever, but when it comes to picking what colors I want to wear on a given day, I'm not thinking of purples at the top of my list right now. And the other one is the Making Mauves palette from Colourpop, and I have only had this for a couple months, but I have made an effort to reach for it very often. Sometimes pairing it with other eyeshadows in my collection, sometimes wearing it just on its own, creating complete looks with this. I think part of it has to do with the nature of the color mauve in itself. Like, that is something that is only very slightly different from my natural skin tone. And so I think a lot of these shades, especially because they are very light, they can either look the same on the eye or they don't show up on me at all. There's really only one shade in here that can deepen up the look, and as a result it makes a lot of my looks look really similar. And also I think for being a mauve palette, there's quite a few shades in here that don't really have a purpley undertone at all. For example, Solitaire, R&R, Tongue-Tied, a la Mode I don't think it is mauve at all, it's more of like a burgundy. These two shimmery shades I don't think are very mauve. One of them does have a little bit more of a purpley undertone, mauve on top. This one can work with mauve looks without changing the color story of the look altogether, but that's like half of the palette not even having a mauve undertone, not even having a purpley undertone. So I think that really limits me in creating a lot of different looks with that mauve motif. Like I briefly mentioned, a lot of these shades are really light, so if you have a deeper skin tone than me, these are not even going to show up on you. And even for me, it's very difficult to create looks that are a little bit more dramatic because I only have one shade to deepen it up, and then a lot of these shades on the eyes look exactly the same. So I'm a little disappointed with this palette. I did want it for a long time because I do love pinky mauve shades, and I just don't really feel like this is delivering on that. Maybe it's user error, maybe I'm not using it correctly, or maybe I need to pair it with some other shades in order to get the looks that I'm wanting. But yeah, I'm a little bit disappointed with this palette in general just because I'm not getting the looks that I thought I would get from this palette. The next one in my ranking is actually the palette that I think would be more appropriately called the Making Mauves palette, because I do think it has a much more mauve color story than the actual Making Mauves palette, and it's the Flutterby. And I really love the undertones and the level of depth that you get from this palette much more than the Making Mauves. It does have a glitter in there, which I'm not a fan of, but other than that, I think the shades are really pretty. This Sunflare shade is gorgeous. It doesn't look as interesting in the pan, but when you put it on your eyes or you put it on the inner corner, it has a really cool shift to it. There's more variety in the shimmers, there's more variety in the deepener shades. You have some more burgundy colors, you have some more plummy colors. So in general, I just think this palette is a lot more versatile. It does have more shades than the 9-pan palette. If you have a medium, a light to medium to deeper skin tone, you're gonna have much more luck actually having these colors show up on you versus the Making Mauves palette. I would recommend the Flutterby over the Making Mauves if you're choosing between one of the two and you don't really know which one. I recommend the Flutterby. I just think it's better. There is only one shade in here that's like a Super Shock formula, which I think is good. I would rather just have regular pressed powder and not the like putty Super Shock formula, because I don't know how long that's gonna last versus just a regular powder. But I just feel like these show up on my eyes, the shades don't blend into each other and look exactly the same, and I feel like I can create a lot more varieties of looks with this palette. I'm not saying I can't create pretty looks with Making Mauves as well. I have already and I do like it, but when I tried to make a 3 looks 1 palette video with this, I found that pretty much every look looked exactly the same, even though I was going out of my way to use different shades for each look. The palette in 3rd place is the Go and Coconuts palette from Colourpop, and I think I choose this over the It's My Pleasure just because I do feel like this color story is more versatile for what I prefer to wear on a day-to-day basis. I do like to wear colorful shadow, but I would say the majority of the looks that I create, because I do work in an office and I don't really feel like wearing something like this to work on a regular basis, especially since I do get ready early in the morning and I don't have a ton of time. I like to use palettes like this more often than the purple palette, the It's My Pleasure palette. One thing I really like about this is that it doesn't look like a boring neutral palette to me. I like that each of the mattes has its own separate color undertone. For example, Shell Yeah has like a very reddish undertone. It's very unique. I don't really have any other shades like this in my collection that I know of. And then Lovely Bunch is more of a warm brown. You have a cooler one called Clionadh. You have 3 very distinct, beautiful shimmer shades. The reason this ranks so high up in my ranking is because every time I create a look with this, I really like how it turns out. I like how it looks on me. I think it's flattering, and I think I look good when I create looks with this palette, and that's really all I want from a palette. Second to last is my newest palette. It's the Natural Lust from Too Faced. I did feature a look using a couple shades from this palette in my most recent eyeshadow bingo video, where I just used only Too Faced eyeshadows. I did end up using the shimmer shade here called On Fire, which is a coppery reddish orange shimmer shade, and when I tried to use it dry, it didn't show up on my eyes at all. It does have a more hard pressed formula, but once I used it wet, it looked fantastic, and I really loved the look that I created with it, and 3 of the shades that I used were from this palette. The majority of the shimmer shades I use on a regular basis, I do use wet, even if they would perform okay on their own. I just like to take it up a notch and use it wet. It's something that I do regularly, so it's not a deal breaker for me. And I also don't feel like every shimmer shade in this palette needs that. There are a lot of shimmer shades in here that are very buttery, and I can just kind of dip my finger and pat it on my eyes and it looks great. For example, this shade here, Too Good, I've already used that several times because I really like the color, but I also like the formula. It's very buttery and soft. I also really like that there is a nice variety in tones and depth. So you have half mattes, half shimmer, which I really like, and then you have a bunch of light mattes, a bunch of medium mattes, and then a bunch of darker mattes, and the same with shimmers. It like runs the gamut. So I have a lot of different looks that I can create with this. It is a bigger palette, so obviously you're more likely to have more variety of looks if you have 30 shades in a palette. But there are just some really unique shades in here. For example, Hot to Trot, that's a gorgeous like deeper burgundy purple matte. You have some really nice actual mauve shades in here. For example, Come and Get It I would consider to be like a true mauve shade. You have a nice mix of cooler tones and neutral tones and warmer tones. You have some fun pops of color with that blue, with that olive, but a lot of really nice everyday flattering tones that I like to reach for on a regular basis. A lot of pinky champagnes, light golds, things like that. And every time, once again, I create a look with this palette, I really like how it turns out, and I think it looks very flattering on me. So that's why this eyeshadow palette ranks at number 2 in all of the palettes I've bought so far this year. And now for number 1, it's the other Too Faced palette, and it is the Natural Nudes. And this just came out this year. I usually take a long time to buy newer palettes. I do a lot of research, I make sure that the hype dies down, etc. But I watched Kat from Kitschnitch do a video, a 5 looks 1 palette video with this, or a 1 month 1 palette video, and I loved her swatches, I loved her review on the mattes, I loved all the looks that she created, and I just really wanted this, so I used a Nordstrom gift card to pick this up pretty soon after it was launched. I appreciate the subtle gradient between all of the mattes. I think that makes it really easy for someone like me to build really nice looks because I can just kind of go from lightest to darkest, and they'll blend together really nicely. I also really like that each of the shimmers are very distinct and different, and so there are no repeat shades in this palette. Another thing I love is the way that they made the matte pans bigger and the shimmer shades smaller, and that they really didn't waste any space on it. I feel like I open this and I think it's very aesthetically pleasing, even though not all of the pans are the same size and shape. I was a bit worried about the size of the pans. The smaller square ones are only half of a gram, and the matte shades, the rectangles, are 1 gram. And because of how wide they are, I thought I would hit pan really easily and maybe use up these shades really quickly. However, I've been actively trying to hit pan on some of these shades, and even though I do use them regularly, they're not going anywhere, and it barely looks like I've used them. I think it's going to take quite a bit of work to actually hit pan on any of these shades, and I think a reason for that is because they are very creamy and buttery, but they're not powdery. They don't really have any powder fallout whatsoever, including on your face, and I feel like you don't really waste any product when you pick it up on a brush. Even if you're using like a scratchier brush, I don't really feel like there's a lot of kick up. I used a lot of shades from this palette to create my engagement photo shoot makeup. I did do a get ready with me video, and I feature a lot of shades from here. I really think the standout feature about this palette is the quality of the mattes. I just think they're so beautiful, so easy to blend, so easy to work with, and I just really like this palette a lot. Some people might look at this and think it's really boring, but for me it's like the perfect everyday palette. Someone just started weed whacking outside, so it's perfect that I'm finishing off the video here. Those were my 6 rankings of my eyeshadow palettes that I've purchased so far this year. Let me know if there's any specific eyeshadow palette content that you would like to see from me, but in the meantime, that's everything I have. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye guys.